welcome to the Wildes Cast. I'm interviewing Dr. Jeffrey Gurian, an amazing, amazing Renaissance man. He's a doctor, a motivational speaker. He's also a comedy writer who wrote a book with Chris Rock. He's going to weigh in a little about the famous slap. He's also a former cosmetic dentist and has written books about happiness and how we can achieve happiness, which is really what we focus on in this interview. Let's get into it. Okay, welcome to the podcast, the Wildes Cast in particular. Dr. Jeffrey Gurian, it is an honor and a pleasure to host you. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me, Rabbi. It's really my honor and my pleasure. When I heard you speak recently on happiness and joy, I said, this is a man I need to know better.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on. You are referred to, I think, very justifiably as a Renaissance man, and I'm going to give a little bio for those who may be unfamiliar, but Jeffrey Gurian, Dr. Jeffrey Gurian, is a Renaissance man because he's so involved in so many different things. He's a doctor, a lecturer, a motivational speaker, also a comedy writer, performer, director, author, producer, radio personality, not always in that order. Jeffrey, is it okay if we call you Dr. Jeffrey? Is that okay?
Or Jeffrey is fine. Yeah.
Jeff, okay, Jeffrey is fine. Is a former cosmetic dentist, former clinical professor at NYU in oral medicine, as well as a 20-year board member of the Association for Spirituality and Psychotherapy. We're going to get into that soon. His specialty was treating headaches and other physical symptoms of stress. And he developed a technique which was called star therapy, which is a very gentle system of talk and touch used to treat symptoms like migraine types of headaches, head, neck, shoulder, and facial pain. And I want to get into that with you in a minute, but let me just say one or two other things. Dr. Jeffrey is also one of the few doctors with a long-standing career in comedy. He's worked with just about every big star in comedy, and he's also the author of 8 books, the last 3 of which are about happiness. The third, which I'm fascinated by, is called Facing Adversity, Stories of Courage and Inspiration, which you wrote during your recovery from hospitalization with COVID double pneumonia, which you just came out of recently. Tell us about that.
Well, it's actually my 2nd anniversary of my recovery. I was, first of all, as you can tell, I'm a trendsetter. So I got the virus as soon as it came out. I didn't want to wait. I went right out and got it. And single pneumonia was not good enough for me. I had to get double pneumonia. And, at the time, they were warning people not to go to the emergency room if you could help it, especially if you had comorbidities. And I had a heart attack about 6 years ago. By the way, I was back on stage in 5 days. I had a widowmaker heart attack. And I used the principles that are in my books. And because God was watching over me, I recovered. And I was back on stage in 5 days. And the owner of the club said to me, "What are you, crazy? You just had a heart attack." And I was like, "Yeah, but it's hard to get a spot here. I didn't want to lose my spot."
You got to know your priorities. Heart attack is one thing, but, if it's a good show.
So I was sick for 2 weeks before I called an ambulance for the COVID thing. And it was at the time when New York City was the epicenter of the virus. And they weren't just sending ambulances for anyone, but when they heard all of my symptoms, they said, "We'll be right over." And 2 men came in hazmat suits. The ambulance attendants were fully dressed in hazmat suits. It was very scary. And it was my first act of kindness. And I want to stress how important kindness is, because one of the ambulance workers took my hand and he said to me, "Don't worry, you're going to be okay." And I can't tell you what that meant, because I had been so sick for 2 weeks, I could barely move, and he was amazed that I could get on the stretcher by myself. He said to me, most people needed to be carried. And he said, of all the people I've taken to the hospital, you have the best physical presentation. And when they took me to the hospital, they wheeled me into the emergency room. And this was an example of how I had to use positive thinking and how to step outside myself. They wheeled me into a cubicle next to a woman who was screaming, literally screaming with every breath that she took. And the normal feeling is, you feel sorry for yourself. Why is this happening to me, right? And the spiritual answer that I've learned is, why not me? Whoever promised me that my life is supposed to be perfect and that nothing was supposed to happen to me? So I'm laying there in a very weak state. This woman is screaming. and I want to be moved, and there's no place else to put me. And I had to, in my mind, I had to step outside myself and start thinking about this woman and how scared she must be, or how much pain she must be in order to be reacting that way. And it allowed me to calm down. And then they x-rayed
Wow.
my lungs and they said to me that they were sorry to tell me I had COVID double pneumonia, because they were actually thinking of sending me home. They were running out of rooms to put people.
Right.
And so that recovery was amazing. Pardon me. That recovery took me several months. When they found an ambulance to take me home, after 4 days, they stabilized me enough to take me home. And when the ambulance guys wheeled me into my apartment and they saw all the pictures of the comedians, they stayed there for about 20 minutes asking me questions until I had to say, guys, I'm sorry, I'm a little tired. I'm still recovering, you know? And,
Right.
and it took a good few months for me to get back to myself. And during that time, I realized that people were living in fear and they needed hope and inspiration. And that's when I wrote this book, Facing Adversity, Stories of Courage
Mhm.
and Inspiration, because they're stories that I collected over a period of 20 years. In 1999, I started cutting out articles of people that impressed me, because everyone in life is given obstacles to overcome. And I know that you mentioned it. We'll talk about it. I was a very severe stutterer through my 20s and beyond, even into my 30s. I stuttered so badly that I couldn't even say my name. I could never say Gurian. And most stutterers have a hard time saying their own name, because your
Mhm.
name is your identity. And if you're not happy
Mhm.
with who you are, it's very difficult to present yourself to people.
Wait, before I want to come back to the stuttering,
Yeah.
because that is fascinating, because I know that you developed a technique to help people,
Yes.
besides your own self that you cured. You said something before. You said it very quickly, but it was quite profound. You said that when you got to the hospital and this woman was screaming, you said to yourself, besides trying to help her, you said something to the effect of, like, why is this bad thing happening? Well, why shouldn't something bad happen?
Hmm.
Maybe we could speak to that a little, because I think when something goes wrong in our lives, the first question we ask is, why me?
Why?
It's not fair.
Exactly.
And but you asked sort of the opposite question. You're like, why not me? Like, can you elaborate on that a little?
Yeah, and I find that fascinating. It's something that I had to learn through my own spiritual study, that, we all tend to be egotistical, in the sense, not in an obnoxious way, but who else's life can you think about but your own? We're always thinking about ourselves. And part of what I did with star therapy is because a lot of our thoughts are negative against ourselves. We're holding thoughts that are not valid for us. And in my own case, that's what caused me to stutter. I was holding negative thoughts about myself. If you've ever been bullied in your life as a child, or anyone ever hurt your feelings or broke a promise to you, I call those things heart wounds.
Hmm.
And they
Hmm.
manifest, we internalize them, and they stay in your heart chakra, and they affect your self esteem and your self confidence. And it's what led to my first happiness book, which I think you saw, Healing Your Heart by Changing Your
Yeah,
Mind, the
yeah.
meditating dog on the cover. And what I talk about in that is that we're so engrossed in our own thoughts. We're always thinking about ourselves. And part of spirituality is learning to think about other people, trying to step outside of yourself, trying to, in the entertainment business, it's very hard to create that balance, because the entertainment business is all about ego. And the
Hmm.
spiritual world is all about detaching from ego, becoming a worker among workers, that
Hmm.
everyone is the same. So when something, most people suffering with emotional illness are sorry for something that they did in the past. They're laboring under, I should have said this, I could have said that, and they're worrying about the future, and they're losing the now. They're not in the present, because they're
Hmm.
so caught up in what they could have done and they should have done to make things differently. And that's because people don't know that they have a path, and everything that happens to you is God's will. And I don't have to tell you this, because this is what you teach, but once in a while your will coincide with God's will, and it'll feel
Hmm.
like you got what you wanted. But it's only because that's what God's will was for you. So when I had the heart attack and I was laying there, I had to tell myself that for whatever reason, this is my path. I can't say why me, because it's arrogant to say, why should this only happen to me? I was very close to my parents, and when I was losing my dad, it's normal to pray for people to get better. And
Hmm.
some genius said to me, well, you can't only pray for them to get better, you have to add the tag, let that be your will for him. Otherwise,
Right.
it's arrogant to tell God what to do. Why should they save only your family when other people are having illness all over the world? So these are things that I had to learn.
Yeah, it's a deeply theological teaching in Judaism. You know what you're sharing because we are so self-focused and self-centered,
Self-centered.
and again, like not in an obnoxious way, like you said. It's just part of our makeup
Yeah,
to be focused and concerned about ourselves. And but that's why we appreciate gifts in life, because we don't we weren't really owed anything. It's not like we came into the world and therefore God should be giving me A, B, and C. Everything is a gift. It's all a gift. We didn't have to be created. I know it's a crazy idea that, and there's a very famous line from King David's book of Psalms, Olam Chesed Yibaneh, that the world was built on kindness,
hmm,
meaning that God wasn't somehow required to will us into creation, into existence, and then give us A, B, and C, so that when we don't get it, we get angry with God. All of this is a gift. None of this had to be, including us. So now that's a very difficult. It's not an easy thing for the average person to just get their arms around. I'm not saying I always walk around with that feeling in my heart, but intellectually, it's an important thing, I think, to enunciate, to articulate, as you did so beautifully, that like it's all gift.
yeah, it takes work, and that's why gratitude is so important. There are two principles that I find that are very important: gratitude and service.
Hmm.
I make gratitude lists because as a human being, there are times when I could feel sorry for myself, and self pity is a very common thing that affects a lot of people, and it can really take you down. And when I was laying in the hospital, I was very aware that when you're in a negative state, your immune system is not functioning as well.
Yeah.
And when you're in a positive state, your immune system rises up and it makes it easier to fight off things. And it was very hard because on my third day, they put me in a room with three other very sick men, all with the virus. And there was one
Hmm.
Orthodox man, 41 years old, whose oxygen dropped within seconds from 90 to 83, and they had to rush him
Oh.
to the emergency room. And so it was a very, very scary time. Nobody knew what was happening. I actually made a video of myself on my third day in there because I didn't know what was going to happen to me. And I felt I needed to document what was going on.
Wow.
I watched it
Wow.
the other day and it was really hard for me to watch. I could hardly speak. My voice was so hoarse and I could hardly speak. But I felt that I needed to do that because it was a very strange experience. But again, this self-centeredness, who else's life can you think about but your own? You'd have to be almost crazy to never think about yourself and only think about other people. It's a very hard thing. So it takes work, like you said. It's a process. It doesn't come overnight, but it's important to open your mind to certain concepts. Like,
And what would you say is the most important? Like we're talking about gratitude. I know that that's a major positive factor in happiness. In my book, I speak a lot about giving. That we giving is necessary in order to feel happy. What would you say are some of the biggest impediments? Let's say the top one or two biggest impediments to a happy state of mind, and what do you suggest to people to overcome them?
okay, well, I think one of the biggest things is how you react when things don't work out the way you would like them to. So
Hmm.
we all have goals that we think that we're supposed to achieve, and you're supposed to take the action to try to make them happen, and then you have to turn over the results. But too many people try to micromanage things, thinking that if they just did this or just did that, that they could make this thing happen that they want. And the idea is that if you don't get what you wanted, you're not being punished. You're not supposed to think, well, I'm the ultimate victim of the universe and nothing works out for me. Other people get this, but when it comes to me, I don't get it. The thought
Hmm.
the thought that you're supposed to have is, well, I didn't get that thing because it wasn't God's will for me. I'm supposed to have something better than that. And if I got the thing I wanted, I wouldn't be available for the really good thing that's for
Wow.
me.
Wow. So, but how? Let me stop you there. That's brilliant. But how do we? how do we convince ourselves? We're so convinced that, let's say, I have it in my mind right now. I have, let's say, one or two personal goals. I have some professional MJE goals, you know, um, and I'm so convinced that those are the things that I need,
Exactly.
or that will make me happy, or that will make the organization thrive, my community. And then you're saying, and let's say they don't happen.
Well, you'll probably
So
get
you're,
those things, but it may not be on your timeline. It may
Mhm,
not be when you want them, because as human beings, we lack patience. That's one of the things. We want everything right away. And the spiritual aspect is that you may get those things, but not when you expect them. They come from,
and let's say you don't get them at all. Let's say we can fast forward 10, 20 years down the line, and it never happens, and you're never getting that job, you're never getting into that school.
right. You're not
I
that
can't,
woman,
you know,
that relationship. Not everyone has
yeah.
that gift. And it's because that's your path, and you have to tell yourself that, or else it can drive you crazy. If you think that you can micro manipulate your life, that you're in control of everything, then you tend to blame yourself when things don't go the way you'd like them to. And the idea is that uh, most things are out of our control. They're completely out of our control. um, Again, you're supposed to take the action, like you have these goals that you want to accomplish, and I'm sure you're trying very hard to make them come true. But sometimes we run up against obstacles that are very frustrating. And what it means is maybe you're supposed to take a different direction. When what excuse me, when you find your true
Mhm,
path, the universe will support you in that. You'll
mhm,
find that usually when you find your true path, that things will start to fall into place. I had a very unusual story that happened recently. You know, you had mentioned star therapy. The R in star therapy
mhm,
stands for resonance, and the resonance
mhm,
refers to my voice because I speak when I do this thing. It's like a guided meditation, and it refers to music because I use music when I do it. Mostly, it refers to a truth. People who are emotionally ill are lacking certain thoughts. Their thoughts are not working for them, and you can't get better with the same mind that got you sick. That's a very
mhm.
important thing. If you're not happy, if you're stuck in a dark place, you need new thoughts, and very often those new thoughts are spiritual wisdom. So, for over 20 years, I've been using music by a man named Stephen Halpern. He's considered
Mhm,
the father of New Age music. At
mhm.
the end of October, I get a message on my machine. It says, "Hi, I'm calling you in reference to a letter that you sent me 20 years ago." 20 years ago. And he said, he,
I thought I was bad. I thought I was bad getting back to
he
people.
never saw the letter, right? Isn't that
Okay.
He never saw the letter until now. His assistant had filed it away, and he's working on his memoirs. And it turns out that this man is Stephen Halpern, a Grammy nominated musician known
Mhm,
worldwide for creating healing spiritual music. And I guess I had written to him 20 years ago to tell him that I use his music in my work. Well, he called me 20 years later to tell me that he was so moved by my letter that he wanted to put music to my words. And now I have a project with Stephen Halpern. It just came out, and he took a guided meditation that I use to help people with stress related illness, put his music to it, and visuals, slides of me using energy
oh
on
wow.
people. And,
You have to, doctor, you have to share that with me. This is very personal because my oldest son, Yosef, um, is doing a lot of musical meditation in Israel now. He writes his own stuff, but I know he would absolutely love to hear this and see to whatever degree he could work some of this in, because it's taking off a little. He gets invited to different people's homes, mostly for people in their 20s and 30s,
mhm.
and it's a meditation, but it's a guided meditation with music.
Isn't that a
And he's actually doing one. He's doing one at MGE next Monday night. If you want to come at 7 p.m.,
okay?
you're welcome to join if you want. No,
Thank you.
no pressure.
You see, but isn't that amazing? I happen to tell that story, and it's meaningful to you. And that's what happens. Like, it was a crazy story that came out of nowhere. I never in a million years thought that I would have a project with a man that I revered so much. Sound healing is very important. Music is
Hmm,
very
hmm,
important in healing. You internalize it in the second chakra, which is the chakra of sensitivity and creativity, and it affects how you feel. So the work that your son is doing is very important, and it's so amazing. When we're finished, I'll send you this guided meditation because I
Thank you.
see it.
Thank
You
you.
could send it to him, but that's how these things work. The universe puts things in your path. I have a million stories. I just happened to pull that one, and it means something to you. So,
Well, let me ask you a question. When you say the universe, I mean, are you referring to God,
yes,
or do
but I
you
say it that
you
way
are?
because there are people who are listening sometimes who question.
Of course.
And
I'm always tempted to replace God with the universe, but then I feel like I'm giving in. But on the other hand,
but
on the other hand, if more people listen and you just,
that's why I do it, because you can call it nature or the universe or God. I'm comfortable calling it God. I do a lot of
mhm,
work with 12-step people, and
nice.
people who used to
Nice.
be addicted to alcohol and drugs and other substances. And those programs are very, very spiritual.
Yeah,
And,
I know.
and
I know.
when people first come in, they're in their bottom. They're they're lacking hope. And if you start talking to them about God, you could turn them off right away because a
Right,
lot of them
right.
feel that God has been against them and all. And so you have to present it in a different way. And what spirituality believes, and again, I always make the distinction between religion and spirituality because religion can be wonderful for people. I'm very proud to be Jewish, but spirituality brings us all together because all it asks is that there's a force greater than yourself, and you could call it nature, the universe, or God, whatever is comfortable for you, as long as you know that it isn't you. Because when you think that it's you, that's when you blame yourself. When things don't go.
And what would you say to people who either struggle with letting go? Okay, this is autobiographical. Okay,
Yeah.
very motivated, detail, perfection oriented people. Not gonna. Okay,
I'm the same.
uh,
I get it. I
that
totally get it.
that's a or now I'm a believer though. I do believe deeply in God, and I believe that God is involved in our lives. In fact, the holiday of Passover is approaching, and that's one of the great teachings of the holiday of Passover because the Exodus from Egypt was the first time that God demonstrated in the Bible, in the Torah, that he's not only a God of creation, he didn't just create the world, but he continues to intervene in the world. He continues to have something to do with our lives. He knows our names, he's aware of us, he cares about us. That's a fundamental Jewish teaching. And that's one of the reasons we eat the matzah and we stay away from chametz and we have all these rituals because the Exodus was a demonstration that God is involved. So I'm a believer, but it's just hard to let go.
Well, I'll tell you, I ask one question to people when they're in doubt, when they can't grasp the concept of a higher power. So I say to them, well, look, how does it diminish you in any way to open your mind to the concept that it could be possible? It's arrogant to say that you know that there's no such thing as God, because who are you to know such a thing? So
Hmm.
if you want to get better, and now I'm talking about 12-step stuff, but if you want to get
Hmm.
better, you have to do what people have done in the past. And the spiritual programs insist that you believe in something greater than yourself. You could call
Hmm.
it a doorknob if you want. You could call it the people in the room that you go to, but you have to know that it isn't you. And so it's presented that way to say you could call it nature or the universe. So very often I talk about the universe to bring more people in because some people feel more comfortable referring to God that way. And
Hmm.
again, it's an expression of a higher power.
Yeah, yeah.
You
I
just have
listen.
to know that it's not you.
However you can get to people, you've helped celebrities and some other noteworthy people achieve happiness. What were their challenges? How were they different than, I guess, non-celebrities? I don't know if you're able to share with us any stories of anyone in particular that you're allowed to share publicly, but it could be helpful to us, I think.
Well, let me say this, that um, I help celebrities in comedy because I wrote material for some of the biggest stars, and some of your listeners might know Milton Berle, Mr. Television, was my sponsor in the Friars Club, and I
Wow.
got to write for Milton Berle and Jerry Lewis and Henny Young
Oh,
and Sid Caesar for his roast. I was the main writer for the Friars roast for 12 years. So I
so just anyone listening to this in their 20s or 30s, because MJE is 20s and 30s, These are Henny Youngman and Milton Berle. These are like the greats.
Legend
When I was a kid, they were older already. So
from the golden age, but your listeners would know Nick Kroll and John Mulaney because I'm the
sure.
first guy. Nick Kroll and John Mulaney are two of the biggest comedy stars right now, and they had me open their Broadway show for them called Oh Hello, and your listeners
Mhm.
would know the sketch Too Much Tuna, which was on Comedy Central. I'm the first guy to be pranked with too much tuna, and your assistant, your producer, knew me from Sirius XM
Yeah,
because I was a
yeah.
guest on it. The biggest comedy show at the time was Ron and Fez, and I used to bring on special guests that were friends of mine every week, like Trevor Noah and D.L. Hughley and Russell Peters
Wow.
and Artie Lang, and just like every big comedy star that was in town, they're usually friends of mine, and I would invite them to come on the show. So I use humor in my work as well because humor is very healing. People need to laugh. And that's what led to me doing these happiness books because I always put a humorous spin on things. You can't take life too seriously. That's easy to say when things are not going well. You know,
Right,
these principles that we
right.
talk about, Rabbi, they're very interesting. They're very easy to use when it feels like your life is going perfectly. Anybody can do that. It's when it feels like nothing is going right in your life that these principles are very important because they give people inspiration and hope. None of us are mind readers, and you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Every single person in your life that you know, besides your family, there was a day before you met them, and you had no idea that you were going to meet them the next day. So, in my personal life, I have met people I had I couldn't possibly guess all the people that I know. I did a book with Chris Rock on the history of the comic strip, and the owner of the comic strip came to my house.
Wait, when did you do a book with Chris Rock? How long ago was that?
About I think it was 2008, 2009,
Wow.
and it was called Make 'Em Laugh, and the
Mm-hmm.
comic strip is a legendary comedy club that's still open
Sure. Yeah, yeah. No, the comic
on
strip.
81st and 2nd. And it's where Eddie Murphy started and Jerry Seinfeld. And Chris
Mm-hmm.
Rock was discovered there in 1985 by Eddie Murphy and the owner of the
Mm-hmm.
club, Richie Tinkin, who just left us about 1 year ago. And so
Mm-hmm.
I've gotten to work with some of the people that I admired my whole life. I never even thought that I would know them.
And who would you say, is there a category of people that you can say are the happiest people you know? Is there more happiness among celebrities, less happiness among celebrities?
It's so
What would you
It's
say?
so interesting that you said that. Show business is a very difficult business because it's all about ego. You know, if you go into a store to buy a shirt, the guy just gives you the shirt. He doesn't give you a shirt and a picture of himself. Here's, here's your shirt. But in the entertainment business, you're always telling people who you are and what you do. So it's exactly the opposite of a spiritual world. And those people get caught up. And I think that's one of the reasons that Will Smith slapped Chris Rock. You know, ego gets blown out of proportion. Ego is
Mm-hmm.
a very dangerous thing. I've been with some of the biggest stars in show business, and when you see how people treat them, they're like our royalty. We don't have kings and queens; we have celebrities. And
And so you think, just going back to Will Smith, you think when he heard that comment, he felt so slighted, or maybe on behalf of his wife, because people are trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. I think what he did, by the way, was terrible, was wrong, but people are saying, well, his wife has this condition, very sensitive, but you're saying really it has a lot more to do with ego.
I think so too. First of all, it's very hard for a man to know that his wife has been with other men openly. I think that's a hard thing
Hmm.
to take. He was laughing at the joke when Chris first said it. And by the way, from my knowledge, alopecia means baldness. She was not bald. She had her hair very short. It looked like she had a full head, like a crew cut. So it could have easily
Hmm.
been a style. And if she was that concerned about it, I guess she could have worn a wig, like a lot of women do. But she chose to show up that way. Not everybody knows her history, that it was alopecia. I'm sure Chris didn't do
Hmm.
it purposely. You know, when I used to write the Friars Roast, I used to go over to the person being honored. Because I don't know if you know, the Friars roasts were really raunchy and very nasty.
Yeah, I've seen some of them on YouTube.
I
Yeah.
was the head writer for a long time, and I would go up to the person being honored and I'd say, "Is there anything that you're sensitive about that you don't want jokes made about?" Because
Oh
I
wow.
never want to hurt somebody's feelings with jokes. And very often they'd say, "Nah, just go for it, whatever you want." And once in a while,
Right.
somebody would say, "Don't mention this." I
Right.
would always
Right.
honor that because I don't
Mhm.
like mean-spirited comedy. These days, comedy has gotten off on another track.
And do you think Chris Rock, your friend who you co-authored this book with, do you think he crossed the line, or you didn't really think
Think he
so?
meant anything by it. He just made a GI Jane mention. That's all.
Right. Right.
And Will laughed. And then the next thing you know, he saw his wife roll her eyes, and he went up and did that thing and slapped
Right.
Chris. And at first, people thought that it wasn't real because it looked like a stage slap.
Right.
But then when you saw him yelling from his seat, you could see that he was really angry. And again,
Right.
actors are used to being very angry. They're used to crying on cue. You know, you never know who to believe. They've been acting all their lives.
Well, that's why I wrote a blog. I can send it to you about what happened there, and I got so many comments by people who really think, who thought, and maybe still do, that the whole thing was staged. I don't think it was staged. I mean, I'm not an expert, but it doesn't look like it was
It
staged. It looked
doesn't
like
look
it
like.
was real.
And at this point,
But I find it interesting that you think it was coming from an ego place. Like, who are you, to make a joke about my wife, so to speak? Um,
exactly. And you know, even more than that, when you have such a big ego, you don't like to be the brunt of a joke, like to be made fun of in front of that kind of crowd. Now, most of them are kind of used to it. You know, when Ricky
mhm.
Gervais was the host, man, he ripped everybody apart. He ripped everybody
He's
apart,
tough,
and he did, and
right?
he just, you know, and people loved it because ego needs to be shattered sometimes. You know, it drives.
Well, my favorite comedian of all time was Don Rickles, and
Uh,
there was no better. They used to call him Mister Warmth. There was nobody.
a hockey puck, but that was the worst. That, you know, you're a hockey puck. I mean, and in the time when Don Rickles was popular, maybe in the 50s, 60s, you had to work very clean to be on television. There was no cable
Right.
TV. So in those days when people came up, like when I first started writing for comedians, I had to write very clean stuff because that's all they wanted because you couldn't do TV if you didn't work clean.
Hmm.
Now there's no limits as to what people can say, and they have these roast battles where they.
But do you think that's good? Do you think that's good, Jeffrey?
Do I think what's good?
Do you think
You
it's
say
good
anything you want.
that people can curse? What that people can? There are no limits at all. Like, there's
I
just
don't like
no.
cursing. I don't like mean spirited humor. These days they make
Mhm.
jokes. If someone in your family has cancer, they'll make a joke about it. To me, that's not
Right.
funny. There are certain things I don't joke about. Illness. I don't joke. Like I know a girl whose sister died in a terrible accident, and they made jokes about it. And it was one of these roast battles. And I said to her, "How does that make you feel when they do that?" And she said, "Well, I had to get tougher about it. You know, I'm used to it
Right.
because they keep doing."
Yeah. Well. You know that according to Jewish tradition, this is a very serious area. It's called in Hebrew onat dvarim, oppression of words, verbal abuse, and even calling someone by a nickname that angers or upsets them is considered prohibited according to Jewish law. Now, it would not justify Will Smith's, behavior. Two wrongs don't make a right. But according to Jewish tradition, we are not permitted to say something that we know will upset another person. You can make them laugh. You can make a little fun of them. So I think what you're saying is 100%. It's just that, like, it's just like there's no whole. I'm not. I don't know. I'm not a fan of people being able to say whatever they want, and the more controversial and upsetting it is to another person's feelings, the more notoriety it gets, and I think that's a
Some
problem.
people go out of their way to be outrageous, and they say things that, to me, are just not funny anyway. I'm not a big fan of
Right.
bathroom humor. I don't, you know, when I used to host shows, I would tell young comics, "Please don't do that on my show." You know, and
Well, that's why I thought I'm such a huge fan of Seinfeld for that
oh, he's a
reason.
word.
I don't love everything.
He's great.
What's
No, I
that?
say he's a
Y-
wordsmith and always work. clean. He's so clever. I was at his Netflix taping. He happened to do it at the comic strip. It was a big secret.
Hmm.
And he thanked me for keeping it a secret, because I've also been a comedy journalist for more than 20 years, and I write about what's going on the comedy scene. And Jerry got
Hmm.
his start at the comic strip, but for many years he always performs at Gotham Comedy Club, because he and the
Hmm.
owner, Chris Mazzilli, are very good friends, and they collect cars together, and they have a lot of things in
Hmm.
common. But when it came time to do this recent Netflix special, he wanted to do it at the comic strip, and Netflix turned the club into the way it used to look in 1976, because that's Jerry was there from 1976 to 1980 until he went to
Hmm.
California. And he brought his old friends to perform with him, and I was there with George Wallace, who's Jerry's best friend. We stood there watching
Wow.
it together, and it was truly amazing. And I kept a secret. He thanked me. I kept a secret for a couple of months that he was doing it. He didn't want people to know that he was going back to the comic strip. And of course, it was a sold out event. Netflix paid him an absolute fortune, And but he's a genius.
No, but
He's a,
he is a genius, and you always point to him as being somebody who is able to get you to laugh at ordinary things without hurting anyone, without having to put anyone down, and without using a four-letter word every 2 seconds.
he
And
doesn't
that's
curse
unique
at all.
today,
He doesn't
unfortunately.
curse at all.
No,
And
yeah.
one night I had to perform, and he was in the audience, and I felt bad. I used a couple of words that I wouldn't ordinarily have used. No,
Hmm.
and knowing he was there, I felt bad about it afterwards. It was like, like he
Let me
didn't say anything, but it was just, you know, he has those.
let me bring you back to the happiness thing, because I know a lot of our listeners, we all struggle with happiness. My first book was, I devoted a lot of time to that from a Torah perspective, what makes us happy. And you've touched on these things: believing in a higher power, getting yourself out of yourself, not being focused on your own personal issues and needs all the time. That's why the 12-step programs, which you mentioned before, always has the person getting therapy helping someone who's worse off.
Yes,
Okay, you always have to help somebody else. That's part of the therapy. What else can you recommend? We were coming out of COVID, thankfully. It was a really rough time. A lot of people speak about the rough time that older people had, but not enough people talked about the rough time a lot of younger people, constituents of MJE, 20s and 30s, single, living in their little 2x4 apartments, and can't go see their parents because they don't want to give them anything, or their grandparents. And Manhattan was not a fun place to live during this time. So a lot of our participants, I think I shared this to you with you when I spoke with you briefly after you came to my class that night. What else would you say to someone besides getting themselves out of themselves? And I appreciate it's the good commercial for MGE by saying how important God is to being happy. Thank you for saying that.
we
And I know you believe that.
yes, we need community. People, we're
Hmm.
social animals. People are not meant to be isolated. And during COVID, there was so much fear. And I actually wrote two books during COVID. The second book that I wrote in my happiness series was called Fight the Fear: Overcoming Obstacles That Stand in Your Way, because I've been battling fear my whole life. It's one of the reasons that I stuttered so badly. And as you can see, I've been given the grace to figure out how not to stutter. And
Can you tell us? I know you're answering the other
yeah,
question. If they're related, if you can throw
they're
in,
all related.
how did you stop?
Yeah.
Good, good. So tell us also how you stop stuttering and how you help other people do that as
And
well.
it's also related to what you brought up about in Judaism, that you don't say things that would hurt another person, because that's what my heart wounds are about. That we carry these things with us. When people have hurt you in some way, you carry it with you, even though you don't want to believe what they said. On some level, you hold on to that negative thought about yourself. When people break up with each other, they say very mean things to each other very often. And you hold on to that. And it affects your self esteem and your self confidence. And it affects every decision you make. Every time you have to make a decision, Rabbi, you use your thoughts to figure out what to do. And if your thoughts are not valid, your decisions are not going to work out for you, which is why people find that they have the same patterns throughout their life, the same bad job over and over again. Every time they get a job, it doesn't work out. Every time they're in a relationship, It's like the same thing happens over and over again. It doesn't work out. And the only common denominator is them. They keep reappearing. So the idea is that in order to change that, you have to change something about yourself, your thoughts. So I started stuttering when I was about 6 or 7 years old. And I'll tell you, it's an interesting story to me. By the time I got to college, I was only 16 when I was in college. I had skipped a couple of grades. They did that in those days if they thought you were smart. So I looked much younger than the other kids, and I was supposedly popular, but I didn't really feel it. And I made myself run for the president of the freshman class of Hunter College. And I told myself if I could win the election, I wouldn't have to stutter anymore because it would show me that people liked me. Because I think I had a feeling that I was stuttering because I didn't feel good about myself. I didn't feel that people liked me. And I won the election. I couldn't even say my name. I had to have other kids introduce me to kids I didn't know and say, "This is Jeffrey Gurian. Please vote for him," whatever. Anyway, I win the election. I'm president of the freshman class, and I still stuttered. And it was a great lesson for me because it taught me that in life, outside validation doesn't work. It doesn't matter how many people tell you you're fantastic and wonderful. It matters what you think of yourself. And so that started my journey on curing myself of stuttering. And I took my mind apart. I realized, and I consider this grace, Rabbi, I really do. I realized one day that I didn't stutter when I was alone. I could go into a room by myself and speak perfectly. I only stuttered when I was trying to talk to somebody else, which told me you can't have a disability based on your location, right? If a man has a limps in every room of his house, he can't go into a room and close the door and walk perfectly.
I love it.
I
I love it.
speak
Yeah.
better when I'm alone. It means there's nothing wrong with me. I created this in my head. So I had to find what thoughts am I holding that are,
Wow.
that are creating this thing for me, self-sabotage. Why am I holding myself back from getting the things that I want in my life? And I'll be very honest, it's not easy for me to say this, but I had the thought that I would never have the things that other people have. I thought I would never be successful. I would never have a business. I thought I would never get married or have children. I even thought that I would never even have my own apartment. And I don't know what gave me those thoughts. I achieved all those things. I have an amazing family and children and even grandchildren, but I doubted myself in so many ways. And I had to literally take my mind apart and examine my thoughts. And I had to take what must have been an inferiority complex and turn it into what I consider a superiority complex, not to feel better than other people, just to feel even. I liken it to this. If I take this piece of paper and I fold it in half, now it's got a crease in it. If I want to get rid of the crease, I have to fold it exactly 180 degrees in the other direction.
Yeah, you need to go to
And
the
now
other
it's flat.
extreme.
That's what I did in my mind. And
But how did you? But what shifted? In other words, you said you said two things, which I found really powerful. Outside validation does not work. It has to be what you think about yourself. And you were only stuttering when you were with other people. When you went into a room and talked to yourself, okay, you weren't stuttering. So, what what did you do to get yourself to think more of yourself?
I I had to convince myself that I was okay, that I was a good person,
Mhm.
that people liked me, that I looked okay. I You have to be able to look in the mirror and tell yourself that you love yourself. And that may sound strange to some people, but
It's not.
there are people who can't
Yeah.
do that. They can't look at themselves. They
Right.
hate to look at themselves in the mirror. I had to embrace myself. Inside of each one of us is an inner child. Little Mark Wildes is still inside of you, and he needs hugs every once in a while because we grow up and we look older, but that inner child is still inside of you. And something happened to me, and I still don't know what it was, but when I tell people that I work with, as an avocation, I work with stutterers all over the world. And it's because I believe that when God gives you obstacles, if you're lucky enough to overcome them, you're supposed to go out and help other people and teach them what you did so that you can become an inspiration to them. Because I didn't do magic. What I tell people, we're all built the same way. If I did it, you can do it as well. If I show you what I did and you open your mind to accepting it, then you can get the same results. One of my greatest cases was with a psychotherapist, and I said to him, I'm afraid that your intelligence is going to work against you, because if you start questioning my methods, you're not going to gain progress. And
Hmm.
he said to me, I won't do that. And he never questioned me. And he wound up stopping stuttering. He says he's 95% cured. I have a video of him on my website. I created a special website during pandemic. Also, I figured out how to make a website. I can't believe it, because I'm not really a tech guy, but it's called stopstutteringnow.gurian.com. And I'm very grateful to put that out there, because people are not telling stutterers that they can get better. And in this country alone, there are more than 3 million people who stutter. And not only are they affected, but their families are affected and everybody that they deal with.
Sure.
So I'm very grateful to be able to say that. Again, it's stopstutteringnow.gurian.com. And there are video testimonies.
S- Stop studying
Stuttering.
now.
Stop stuttering now, Gurian,
Gurian.
Gurian
Okay.
dot
Got it.
com.
Hmm.
And there are video
Okay.
testimonials on there so that they can actually see people who speak better using these techniques. So,
Well, one thing I want to jump in. You said something about loving yourself, and that you were a little apologetic about it. You should just know that the central biblical adage that the whole world knows, love thy neighbor as
mm,
thyself. Right? The Torah could have just said, Vahavta l'reacha, love your neighbor, but it says kamocha, like you do yourself. Now, it implies, the Torah is implying that you have some sense of self and admiration for your own self. And we all know that, the people who really struggle um, with relationships with other people are struggling with their own sense of
usually,
self. It's very hard to love somebody else if you don't have, but also going back to our God universe discussion, you know what it says right after the verse? It says, V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself, ani Hashem, I am God. And all the commentaries ask the question, why does God have to throw himself in there? It's already in the book of Leviticus. We know about God already, and we're smack in the middle of the Torah in the Bible. And because what aspect of yourself should you come to love? Is it the way we look? Is it how much money we make? I mean, I guess to some degree, we have to love, you know, on a I guess on a small level, some of those superficialities. But what the rabbis teach, it's the Ani Hashem, I am God. That's what it says after love thy neighbor as yourself. What aspect of yourself should you come to love? It's the part of you that's godly. It's the part of you that was created in God's image, that can really be connected to something greater than ourselves. If we can love that aspect of ourselves, then we could really love anyone if you think about it. Because what separates us often from other people is all the externalities. But if we can get down to what we all really have in common, which is our soul, that we're all created in God's image, and we love that part of ourselves, shouldn't be anything stopping us from loving anyone else.
and it's a great concept, but it's not easy to do. All these things take work. When people sometimes say, can you give advice on this? I say, you know what? Advice is just words. It's just my opinion. It's just words. But it takes time to put those words into effect. You know,
And what kind of work would you suggest somebody do, excuse me, if they have serious self-esteem
a
issues,
good, oh, oh,
meaning they're stuttering as a result, or some other issue that
well, if they're stuttering, I hope that they'll send me an email, because I always make myself
Mhm.
available, and it's on the site.
Mhm.
Jeffrey at jeffreygurian.com is my email, and I make
Okay, good.
myself available. But it's very important to make a good and bad list. This is a something that I discovered many years ago. I think when I was still back in college and I was working on techniques, because I used affirmations. I did a lot of auto hypnosis, auto suggestion to change my thoughts. I would repeat affirmations hundreds and hundreds of times a day. I'm okay. I'm good the way I am. I no longer need to stutter. Some people don't like to use negatives in affirmations. I don't find anything wrong with it. I realized that I had a subconscious need to stutter. My subconscious mind created the need for me to stutter. And the process is convincing your subconscious mind that that's not valid, that I no longer need to stutter. I don't need to hold myself back. I was a kid in school who made believe I didn't know the answer so the other kids wouldn't feel bad. I didn't want to look smarter than them. So if the teacher asked
Hmm.
me the answer, a question, I would say, I'm sorry, I don't know. I would rather hold myself back. When I was in practice, a patient said to me once, he said, I think you'd rather hurt yourself than hurt me. And I said, yeah, you're right. I said, me
Hmm.
personally, I happen to be an empath.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I feel things very deeply, which is not an easy way to go through life, but you don't have a choice. So if you're listening and
Right.
you're sensitive, especially if you're a guy, men don't like to talk about being sensitive. But if the world was more sensitive, it would be a kinder place. People would get along better. There's nothing wrong with being sensitive. So I've had to learn to embrace my sensitivity and to use it as a strength and not as a weakness. And I think
And
what
would you? And let me just cut you off for a second. Is the meditation, whether it's musical meditation or just meditation in general, is that one of the purposes in your mind of meditation, which is to sort of like a mantra, repeat over things that you're struggling with? You don't think you're good enough. You don't, let's say, think you're smart enough. You're
that
not,
could
I don't know, you don't look.
that could be part of it, but it's to teach your body what it feels like to be relaxed. Because when you're living with anxiety, which so many people are, especially after the last 2 years, we're all living with anxiety and we absorb it. We don't realize we're like sponges, we take it in. Your body is very accustomed to knowing what it feels like to feel anxious, but it doesn't remember what it feels like to feel relaxed. So when you allow
Mm,
yourself to go into a guided meditation, you're retraining your body. There's a thing called cellular memory, which I find fascinating. Cellular memory means that every single thing that you've experienced since you're born in your senses is still inside of you. It's the reason why you could hear a song you like and it'll remind you of the girl you liked in the third grade, and there's no thought about it. It comes back immediately. Or you smell a perfume and you're like, wow, my kindergarten teacher wore that perfume. It's like a sensory deja vu. It brings you back immediately. There's no thought involved. So all your thoughts are trapped inside of you. Everything you've ever experienced is still inside of you.
and and the meditation in your
It
mind
teaches you to
can
relax.
help, teaches the body how to relax, how to relieve itself of some of the stress that we're
Yes.
experiencing. But can it be used towards, let's say, helping somebody who is stuttering or someone who is has inner negative beliefs about themselves? Can it be used to just
To
through, I guess,
it can
behavioral?
be used to reprogram your mind. I use it on some
Mhm.
people. Some of the people that I work with are so hyper and so filled with anxiety that I have to reteach them what it feels like to feel calm. So I'll do a guided meditation with them for 5 to 10 minutes as part of the
Mhm.
session, and I'll repeat it. It has to be done in a repeatable way. So it's the same room, the same music, the same voice, so that your body gets accustomed to it. When you do something over and over again, you can internalize it. You can't you
Sure.
can't re-experience something you haven't experienced for the first time, right? You can't redo something. You
Interesting.
have to
Sure.
experience it once first in order to be able to do it again and again. And
I mean, it's similar. It's similar a little to the concept of prayer, like when we say, let's say, the Shema, which is one of those central Jewish prayers. It's really a declaration of
mhm.
faith, but it's not just saying it. We're supposed to sort of think about the letters and the words, and the more you say it, the more it becomes part of you know language affects us.
Ab-
So when we say something and we hear ourselves say that thing, it impacts us. That's, I guess, the same. Going back to the 12-step program, my name is so and so. I am a. Why do you have to start off the meeting? Everybody knows you are. You wouldn't be at the in the. You know you what you are. Why do you have to hear
you
yourself
have to
say it?
own it. And I call
Yeah.
it verbalization. I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because when I work with people who are in pain, like who get what they think are migraine headaches, in in this country alone, let me say, there's more than 150 million people who think that they're suffering with migraine headaches that are really musculoskeletal headaches that come from clenching and grinding their teeth from stress. The proper
Right.
term is bruxism, and it creates a host of problems. Many people wake up in the morning and their neck hurts. And if you wake up in the morning and your neck hurts, the last person in the world you would think to tell would be your dentist. Why would you ever tell your dentist that your neck hurts, right? It wouldn't occur to you. So a lot of these things go undiagnosed, and people are walking
Mhm.
around suffering with headaches, severe headaches, and nobody's helping them with it. And so that's one of the other things that I lecture on. When I was teaching at NYU, they saw me taking away headaches just using the energy from my hands. And if you just walked into a university and told them that you did that, they'd probably call the police. They'd throw you out. But they saw me doing it.
You're a quack.
Yeah,
You're a
exactly.
quack.
But
Right.
they actually saw me doing it, and the head of the oral medicine department invited me to lecture to the faculty on that technique. And then the head of the TMJ department, a guy named Michael Gelb, very famous in the TMJ world, had me do one of my treatments on him, and then he had me lecture to his graduate students, the doctors in TMJ. There's a very real thing about energy between people. We feel it all the time. It's the reason that we hug each other very often. In spiritual circles, everybody hugs because it makes you feel
Mhm.
centered. It gives you, a sense of calmness. Um, Hopefully, we've all experienced it. If you've ever been upset and someone that you cared about and trusted gave you a hug and you felt better about it,
Oh, it's
yeah, it's
transformative. It's
because you
transformative.
allowed them to transfer positive energy to you. And that's what we do. And you can also do that for strangers. Uh,
You know, the Dr. Gurek, you would appreciate the story. I heard this from Neshama Karbach. You've heard of the late and great Shlomo Karbach, I'm
sure.
sure, the great musician. So I was once doing it's called Eli Talk. It's like a Jewish version of TED
Hmm.
Talk, and I went on, and then when I finished, Neshama Karbach went on, and Neshama I happen to know for many years. It's Shlomo's daughter. She told me the following story. When she was a little girl, her father used to perform in prisons. He used to go and sing in prisons. And there was one prison where there was one particular inmate who was so dangerous that they would not let him to come to anything. And Shlomo Karbach heard about him and said he refuses to perform in this prison unless they bring him out.
Mm.
And they let him come to his show. So they bring him out in chains. These two guards assigned to him sitting there the whole time. And after the show was over, Shlomo was a big hugger. This is why I'm telling you the story. He hugged everybody. Okay. And he hugged one by one. All of the inmates and the prisoners were coming over to give him a hug. And there was this huge guy with chains and the two guards on either side. And Shlomo just walked forward, ignored the two guards, gave him a hug. And then when he finished, the guy broke down and he said, "Rabbi, can I get another one?"
Mm.
So Shlomo gave him a second hug, and he whispered into his ear, he says, "If somebody hugged me like that when I was a kid, I probably wouldn't be here now."
Yeah, that's a beautiful.
Very, very
And
powerful.
it's so powerful. And I was hoping that was going to be the end of it because I had a feeling, yeah, that's the power of a hug. People need those things. The way
Yeah.
the way you hug a child when they're upset, that's the power of touch. When somebody's in pain and you put your hand on them, like I said, I've been on the board of the Association for Spirituality and Psychotherapy for 20 years, and they accepted my work. I'm not a classically trained psychotherapist. They're trained not to touch people. I told them I always
Right.
touch. As a dentist, you're cradling people's head in your hands. You can't get much closer than
Right.
that. And one of them came over to me and he said to me a few weeks later, I lectured to them and I told them about the power of touch and how important it is. And he said to me, I got to tell you this story. He said, I was working with a woman and she was crying hysterically. He said, and I couldn't help it. I went over and I put my hand on her shoulder. I couldn't, he was like apologizing that he went over his hand on her
Right.
shoulder.
Right.
And when she came back the next week, he said she couldn't stop thanking me for doing that simple thing, that I put my hand on her shoulder and it was so comforting to her. And I said, that's the power of touch. And that's why you shouldn't
Wow.
limit yourself to doing that. And when I went to school, they taught us such a wrong thing. They said, never shake hands with a patient, never make personal contact with a patient. And I was shocked because my patients used to hug me and I thought that was great. And so the power of touch is
Yeah.
powerful.
Listen, we unfortunately we live in a very different
Yes.
age where that's
No,
just
you
not going
can't
to
do
be
that. Right.
acceptable.
You can't do
Yeah.
that with everybody. But
But You can't do that with everyone, but it really does demonstrate. You know, the Talmud also says that when you visit someone who's sick, you remove 1/60th of their illness. And there's somehow a belief, like you were talking about before, how if you're in better spirits, you have a better ability to fight
Your immune
off.
functions better.
Um, your immune system is in a better position to defend against intruders. So this is very, very important because just getting chizuk, we call it in Hebrew chizuk, just getting strength. You know, it says that in the Torah about giving charity. It doesn't just say give the person what they need financially. The language in the Bible is in the Hebrew. It says vehechazakta bo, and you will strengthen him. And I always tell this to people: if you don't believe in giving somebody on the street $1 because you think they're going to spend it on a cigarette or drugs or whatever it is, then you could still give them chizuk. You could still look at them and say, "Hey, have a nice day. I hope things get better for you," or something positive, because a positive word and certainly a hug can go a long way. I want to thank you for giving us so much wisdom here and so much inspiration. If you want to just do another little quick plug for all of your amazing books and works, and go for it, because as far as I'm concerned, the more our participants read your stuff and listen to what you have to say, the more healing that we're going to all be able to
Thank you so
see.
much, Rabbi. It was really so special to be on with you, and I appreciate this. There were 3 books in the happiness series. The first one is this: Healing
Hmm.
Your Heart by Changing Your Mind, a spiritual and humorous approach to achieving happiness. The meditating dog on the cover. And dog is God spelled backwards. And then the second book,
That's the atheist who was dyslexic. That's the old
and
joke.
the second book in the happiness series was called Fight the Fear, Overcoming Obstacles That Stand in Your Way, which is one,
That's the one. That's the one you wrote from your
well,
hospital bed.
that's the second one that I wrote from my hospital. I wrote 2 books, 2 books while I was recovering.
Wow.
But Fight the Fear has all the things that I had to fight throughout my life: the stuttering thing, the heart attack, the COVID double pneumonia. I had fears of traveling, so I made myself go to Japan all alone in 2019 because it was the scariest thing I could think of to do. Because I challenge myself on a daily basis to do whatever makes me uncomfortable. Things that other people can seem to do comfortably, I need to do them also. And the last book, my most recent book,
Wow.
is called Facing Adversity: Stories of Courage and Inspiration. They're all available on Amazon. This one, it just came out. These first 2 were bestsellers on Amazon. And people, from the reviews that I get, people say that they help them a lot to learn how to think differently and to achieve happiness. So I'm very grateful to have been able to be on with you today, Rabbi. There's no there's
Really a
no
pleasure.
accident that we met, and I thank you.
No, there's no accident. I really appreciate you coming, and I'd love for you to come back sometime in person and talk to our community. You've got a lot of life wisdom and spiritual healing wisdom to share. God should continue to
Thank,
bless you to share your gifts and to help really just the amazing work that you're doing. And I thank you for coming on. It's really been
thank
an
you so
honor.
much, and I would love to come and speak anytime you want. I'm speaking at a temple tonight, as a matter
Awesome.
of fact.
Awesome.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Have a
Let's make it
wonderful
happen.
day.